Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Deanna O'Connor, and I am the founder of an initiative called the Speak Up Club. I'm also a very multi-hyphenate career person with broad experience in media and communications. But the Speak Up Club was initially founded to work with women in business. So that was to help them with presentation skills, confidence, things like that. Since lockdown, we've been doing lots of webinars with iconic offices, branching out into things that are in the broader sphere of media training and communication, such as branding, personal branding, social media, lots of things like that. But today, what we're going to do is talk about imposter syndrome and kind of unpack that, what it is, how we think about it, some new thinking on it, and how it can affect people in the workplace. So I'd like to welcome you all firstly, and I'd just love to, while we go through this, obviously it is a webinar rather than a group kind of workshop, but I think this would lend itself very well to being a workshop because there's a lot of things I'd really like you to think about. And I would love if we were in a workshop situation to actually talk about with you. But I hope it is thought-provoking and that maybe you'll talk about it with your workplace colleagues, friends after this today. So by the end of the session, what I hope you'll come away with is a really good understanding of what imposter syndrome is. It's kind of one of those trendy terms we've heard bandied around, but I want to give you a proper definition and really see how it can affect people, how it can impact their performance in the workplace, and then how we can look at kind of starting to shift some of those attitudes that underpin it. But I also want to kind of turn things on its head and ask you some questions to think about. And really understand then how it can affect people in the workplace a little bit more and what we can do in the workplace to kind of change that. So it may be that you're here today because you feel like you suffer from imposter syndrome. It may be that you work in HR, diversity or inclusion, and you're just doing this as a little bit of extra learning around what you do. But I think hopefully this will be valuable to everyone. And I think bringing away some of these thoughts and issues into your own workplace could be very valuable. So not just in your own life as well, but for the rest of your colleagues. So imposter syndrome was really kind of first starting to be talked about in the mid-1980s when psychologists coined this term. So it's also known as imposter phenomenon. And to give it its proper psychological association definition here, it's the situation in which highly accomplished, successful individuals paradoxically believe they're frauds who will ultimately fail and be unmasked as incompetent. So it's really that feeling of feeling like you're a fraud, like you don't belong somewhere, like the jig is going to be up any minute now and people are going to know you don't really know what you're doing and you shouldn't have the job you have in a workplace context. And this really sort of came about in the mid-80s and has sort of been, something that has grown a lot, I think, recently in the media, in the press, kind of high profile people have talked about it. And I think with our general wave of anxiety that as a human race, everyone seems to be suffering from at the moment, it seems to be becoming more and more prevalent. So it is something that a lot of people are feeling in the workplace. But I think one thing that I'd like you to bear in mind is that it really came about when, I suppose, more women entered the workplace. And from my background at the Speak Up Club, this is why I'm particularly interested in it and who is feeling it, why they're feeling it, and what you can do about it. So firstly, though, the kind of original studies that were done, they really did focus on female graduates and very high achieving female graduates in the US. So, Ivy League colleges, very successful people, but maybe feeling that where they had got their results were maybe down to luck, or they'd got into an Ivy League college because they, because of their name or their family or other things, they didn't deserve to be where they were. So it really did start off being studied psychologically with high achieving female graduates. And I think that's something that has really run through the whole train of study and thought around imposter syndrome. It is something that disproportionately affects women, but I know we have some gentlemen joining us today, and it's not to say that it can't affect anyone. And I think that, it's not specifically women, but it definitely does seem to disproportionately affect women. And we'll talk a bit more about maybe why that is in a little bit. I don't want to give too much away too soon. So it is experienced by 70% of people in the US workforce. So that's quite a high number. And I'm sure that kind of number is probably quite similar here. And I think it's not something that you experience maybe all the time. It might come and go. It might be when you get a new job and you kind of wonder, are you really qualified? is this the right job for you? Are you the right person for the job? It can come and go, or it can be a sort of low level constant in your life. It can affect different people variously. Notable people with imposter syndrome, and there are loads. If you Google celebrity imposter syndrome, you'll find so many people, but like some of these I've pictured here on this slide, like Tom Hanks, one of the most beloved actors in the world, has spoken publicly about feeling like a fraud sometimes. The actress Natalie Portman is a really interesting example, because she was a child star from the age of 12, and so when she actually went to Harvard University, that was when her imposter syndrome really kicked in, because she felt that, and she spoke about how she felt that maybe her fame had helped her through the admissions process. Maybe she wasn't, clever enough to be in a college that was so academically rigorous. So she's a very intelligent woman, clearly, but it really kicked in for her when she actually went to college and wondered, was it her fame that helped her get into that high profile college? Penelope Cruz, the actress, has talked about how, every film set she starts working on, she feels like they're going to fire her in the first week because she shouldn't really be there, even though she's clearly a very well-known award-winning actress. So it can, at any stage of your career, it can stay with you. Michelle Obama famously spoke out about it, and this is probably why it's been probably more in the media recently. Since then, a couple of years ago, she was giving an address at a girls' school in London and said that she still feels it, and that really she struggles, that it's with her forever, that she can't shake it off. And she's an incredibly accomplished person, and I'm sure she has access to the best of counselors, therapy, mentors, coaches, whatever you might need to shake it off. So if she's struggling, I don't know what hope there is for the rest of us. But other people I think were worth mentioning. I put Neil Gaiman, the author, in there as well, because obviously hugely famous, and one of the few men that have spoken about it. Maya Angelou, the author, spoke about it too, and I think she's someone that people would often, would be a source of inspiration and inspirational quotes to a lot of people. And it's like, damn, if the source of inspiration to lots of people is even feeling it, it really shows everybody does. And then Sheryl Sandberg, obviously one of the most high profile businesswomen in the world. But I think it's really important to remember with someone like Sheryl Sandberg, and this I think is something we'll touch on again later, is that being a woman in Silicon Valley, where she might be the only woman in the room, is certainly something that can maybe double down on feeling I don't belong here because I'm the only person like me here. So we're going to come back to that later, but I just want you to bear that in mind, because sometimes feeling like you don't belong is because you are the only person representing who you are in that place. So some of the effects that having that imposter syndrome feeling can have on you can lead to things that, it's not a clinically diagnosed syndrome as such. So it's not something that would be spoken about in the same way as, something clinical like clinical depression. It's a syndrome that people feel, but it does induce some effects and symptoms that can be similar to more clinical diagnoses. So it's not something you will be clinically diagnosed with, but it can lead to things like depression. It can lead to more generalized anxiety. Can also give people a real lack of self-confidence and a real diminished sense of self-esteem. So these kind of things can really affect you. If you are feeling imposter syndrome, particularly in the workplace, then that can really spread out into your wider life and the effects it will have on you. So, it is something that we really need to tackle if it is something that feels like it is becoming overwhelming. In a very workplace oriented sense, it can have, obviously a lot of impacts on your work performance if you feel like you are not up to the job and you feel like a fraud in your job. So we're going to go into this a little bit more detail in the next slide, but I just want to show you kind of on a broader sense that if you are feeling, and so a lot of people who are feeling that they are suffering from kind of imposter syndrome, like this guy here. So what he's feeling is uncomfortable in acknowledging his own role in his performance. So he's like, me, I'm the manager of this company. Oh no, I only got this job because, my cousin works here, or I was lucky, or, oh, no one else turned up for the interview that day, or, they're not really acknowledging, I worked really hard to get where I am. I've trained hard. I have qualifications, I have skills, I have experience, I put in the hours, and all the rest of it. So people who are suffering from imposter syndrome are not comfortable in saying to themselves, I did this, I'm worth this, I deserve this. And they're like really not feeling the connection between all these things they might write their CV and see, but not genuinely believe in their heart. They don't really embody feeling that that is them and that they should be there. And so that is kind of what it kind of manifests as, is not acknowledging your own role in your performance and not seeing that connection and feeling like you are that person when you look at your CV or your LinkedIn and you see all those qualifications, you know, not registering that that is you and you are that. So how this comes across then in work, the two most common ways it manifests are two very different ways, actually. And I think this is so interesting. So one is that you either become a procrastinator because you're like, oh my God, I can't do this job. So you're afraid you won't be able to do it. So you put off doing it. I think that's my one personally, lastminute.com. Or the other way you do it is that you over prepare. So if you're going into a meeting that you probably don't even need to prepare for it because you know your job inside out and all you have to do is trot out stuff you already know, but you spend the entire night before up preparing for it, barely sleep, go over your notes constantly, and then go in and you're burnt out and exhausted and probably, you know, don't even do the best job because you're overtired, overstressed, and over anxious, then that's another way that that can manifest. So you can either put things off till the really last minute and not do them because you're afraid you can't do them, or else you've such a fear you can't do them, you completely burn yourself out trying to overcompensate for that, when in fact, if you had just worked at a level, a normal level, you probably would have actually fared much better because you wouldn't have burnt yourself out. So all of these things, so not acknowledging your own role can lead you to miss opportunities because you just think, oh, I'm not good enough. Putting things off until the last minute can lead you to miss opportunities because it means you're struggling to catch up on things you haven't done, so you can't actually take up an opportunity that arises on an ad hoc basis. And then burnout will definitely lead you to miss opportunities because you will at some point crash and burn and really just have to take a step back or be too exhausted. So it's really, really important to get a handle on this before it really kind of takes over your working life. So if you are kind of feeling it sometimes, I think that it's important to look at it and start talking to yourself about it. Now, this is the imposter cycle, which was kind of, you know, designed by psychologists, which really shows in more detail how it works. So if we look at the top left of the screen there, where we see achievement related tasks. So this is something you have to do. So you get a task to do. It is something that will, you know, require a level of achievement. What happens? Your anxiety kicks in, your self-doubt kicks in, the worry kicks in. So you're like, oh my God, I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I don't know how to do it. Then you do either your over preparation or your procrastination. Eventually, whether you have killed yourself doing it or whether you put it off till the last minute and kind of fluffed your way through it, you get the job done. So we get to this accomplishment stage. So you get the job accomplished and there is a brief reprieve in your cycle of worry where you get this feeling of relief. It's great, you've done it. It doesn't last long because the minute somebody gives you some positive feedback and says, great job, well done, you either jump in with, no, oh my God, I put so much work into that. I mean, I was up all night. You know, I couldn't just do that. I had to do like a Trojan amount of work. A normal person could have just done it. I couldn't just do it. I had to do like 7 times the amount of work anyone else would have done on it. So you discount your positive feedback with, you know, how much effort it was for you. You were clearly not able to just do it like a normal person who is qualified to do it would be able to do it. Or you're like, oh, no, oh, look, I total last minute here, didn't put any work into it, just absolute fluke, sure, you know, beginner's luck or something like that. So whatever way you're coming from, there are ways you will discount your positive feedback, tell them basically, no, I'm rubbish, I did not do that because I know how to do my job, I did it because of some completely random circumstance. And then you kick back into thinking and telling yourself that and believing that. So you think you're a fraud, you doubt yourself, you feel depressed about it, you feel anxious about it. And then you go into the next job still feeling that. And that's how this cycle just keeps looping and looping around. So that's not good. Obviously, you need to break that cycle somewhere. So how can we do that? So I haven't put a huge amount of slides up about how we're going to break this cycle because I think we really need to keep it simple and really, you know, there might be just a few simple phrases on this slide, but how you take this phrase and work on it yourself personally, bring it away and apply it to your life is where the power is in it. So 3 steps might not seem like a lot, but step 1, maybe how do you know your worth, right? So that's just one little phrase on the slide. But what I want you to do to know your worth involves lots of different things. So understanding the value that you bring to the table. You could take it as simply as looking at your CV, really thinking about, look at my qualifications. I have them. They're part of me. If you feel unhappy with your qualifications, maybe it's time to sign up to do some professional development, do a course, but look at what you have and appreciate that. Look at how much you're paid. Are you paid enough for your job? If you're not, maybe you need to talk to your boss about that. But it's like, you are where you are for a reason. Maybe you need to look at your most recent performance review. And I think that can be very valuable in terms of focusing on the positives of it. A lot of us will just focus on the negatives. But I think you need to actually go back and look at it and look at the positives. And one thing to say about performance reviews is I know someone who had a performance review where they were rated with a slider. So the person doing the review just did that, slid it to wherever they thought was, a good grade on it. And then when they got their performance review, they looked at the year before's performance review and saw that it was 2 points less than it had been the year before. And they freaked out and eventually went back and went, well, why was that 2 points less? And the person doing review went, oh, I didn't look at the review from the year before. I just slid it up to excellent. And it landed somewhere in the excellent category. So, you have to go back and question these things if something like that happens to you, and then you might find out that actually, something like that was a very simple mistake that this person was super upset about, really, questioned their whole existence, their time at that company, their promotion path, everything. And when they went back and actually asked the question, found out that it was just a simple sliding thing, that they didn't check what it was at the year before and do it versus the year before. They just put it up to the excellent box and it landed somewhere in that box. So it was a very simple thing that this person had set off into an absolute spiral of doom about. So I think that it's important to ask the questions and then focus on the positive and make sure that you are not, going into performance reviews and just focusing on the negatives as well, because that can set you off a very negative path. So the next thing I want you to do is rebrand your fear. So a lot of what we feel is, how we've decided in our head to feel. And we tell ourselves a lot of negative self-talk. So if you feel and you're constantly telling yourself, I'm a fraud, I'm a fraud, I'm a fraud, you will start to believe that. If you start saying, I'm a very well qualified person, I have a good job, I am valued by my boss, my performance review underlines this, my boss has said nice things to me, write down the nice things they say to you and read them. If they, tell them they need to give you more compliments and more positive feedback if you need to hear it. So all of this fear, all of this negative self-talk, we can flip that around and turn that fear into excitement, turn our negative self-talk into positive self-talk. I often say to people in workshops, if your best friend or your mother or your partner spoke to you and said the things to you that you say to yourself when you're beating yourself up about stuff, they would not be part of your life anymore. You would have, cut them off, broken up with them, whatever it is. So we need to be good to ourselves in how we speak to ourselves. And that's really important. You need to speak to yourself like you would speak to, not like a child, as in speak to yourself in a childlike way, but if you were nurturing, one of your children and you're trying to speak to them in a really positive way and say nice things to them and build up their sense of self, then speak to your inner child like that as well. And we all are essentially our inner child at heart. So be nice to your inner child, be nice to yourself, have positive self-talk, and then things that are negative and these little negative loops that start in your head, like the fear loop, channel that and think, no, why am I scared? This is excitement. So we get this response in our brain when we start to stress out and feel fear. And that's that fight or flight response that makes us get all sweaty palms and nervous and nauseous and heavy breathing and like, I can't do this. So channel that and think of it as excitement rather than fear. So that will calm you down and look at the stressful situation or work situations or things that you think, I'm not good enough to do this job, for instance, that's not, channel that fear. Don't think of it as stressful. Don't think of it as I can't. Think of it as this is really challenging. I'm going to learn from this. And if there is a part of the job that requires, something that you actually don't know how to do, well, then this is a really golden opportunity to get some professional development, to learn a new skill. So think of it as challenging and think of it as an opportunity, so that everything you don't know is an opportunity to learn something new. And then finally, if you go forward with that mindset, I'd like you to really just enjoy that growth, because if you're feeling imposter syndrome, it means you're outside of your comfort zone. And if you're feeling the discomfort zone, that means you are heading to the growth zone. And I did a webinar about getting out of your comfort zone and entering into the growth zone a while ago. So I'm sure that's up on the YouTube channel. I kind of cover all the webinars up there. So if you want to search for that and look at some more information about going from comfort zone to growth zone, there's a lot there that will actually follow on and kind of link in with what we're talking about here today, and that might be helpful for you as well. But really focus on, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, it means I'm growing. If something is challenging, it's an opportunity to grow. And with that, go forward and try and use that in a positive way. So the other thing, and this is where I want to turn things on their head a bit with imposter syndrome, is another way to tackle it is to really question its existence. This is coming from, back to that thing I said at the start, where it disproportionately affects women. And why do you think that is? So I suppose when imposter syndrome was first talked about, it was in the 1980s. It was probably a time when more women were entering the workforce, more women were entering the world of business. And so they started to feel like they didn't belong. And I don't think we've changed so much now. There's still a lot of boardrooms where a woman will walk in and be the only woman there. So it's that kind of like, if you're not a middle-aged white man, do you belong there feeling? So yeah, anyone can belong anywhere if they have the qualifications and they've done the work. But unfortunately, when you walk into a room full of people who are not like you, then you start to feel insecure and doubt yourself and feel like you wonder if you belong there. And it could be, if you walk into, if you have come from like a poor area and you suddenly go into a boarding school that you got a scholarship to, and you're like, I don't belong with all these people, like they're different to me. So, it can come from any situation where you're thrown into a room full of people that you feel like, I'm not part of this clique, I don't belong here. And then that kind of, am I good enough to be here? Should I be here? Am I well dressed enough to be here? Am I rich enough to be here? It can be anything. So, that's really where this whole thing started to come about when women joined the workplace. And so really the whole flipping it on its head thinking that's coming through now is that, is it the people with the imposter syndrome that are in the wrong, or is it the toxic work culture and systemic bias and the patriarchy that is in the wrong? And maybe we don't need to fix the people, maybe we need to fix the places. So things like that is part of it. Then also when people go into a workplace where maybe they do feel, and it's a huge issue, I think, in diversity and inclusion now, especially. And so, it started with studying women. It's certainly a lot of work being done, in particular in the US, on women of color, other, people of color in general, underrepresented groups in the workplace, whatever they may be. So basically everything and everyone that comes under the diversity and inclusion banner was probably going to feel, more imposter syndrome, or more likely to feel imposter syndrome in the workplace. But is that because they're going into a workplace that isn't made for them, where they don't see people like them? And then that starts that loop of feeling like you don't really belong there. So that's really where research on this is going at the moment. And the kind of things that can have been found to trigger feelings of imposter syndrome now seem to be kind of backing this up. So people are feeling like, they're chronic underrepresentation in the workplace, uncredited work efforts. And that's a really important thing that I think people are starting to talk about, is that, really kind of valuing people's work and kind of backing them up on it and highlighting it can be so important to make people feel like they belong and make people feel like they're being valued. So crediting people's work and openly speaking and openly giving them praise is very important in kind of including them into what can seem like an exclusive club. And then microaggressions can be another thing that, really trigger it for some people. And I know, saying a lot of readings about women of color in the workplace, that can be like things like people touching their hair, like Emma DeBerry's famous book, Don't Touch My Hair. So that's something that, can make people feel a little bit like other when their otherness is pointed out and made a thing in the workplace. So all of these things can contribute to people feeling like not belonging. And then that, I suppose, can be called imposter syndrome in them, but actually is it the workplace that is causing this rather than the person? So that's why some of the new thinking around this is really fix the place, not the person, and really create a workplace where most underrepresented employees can feel comfortable, can feel like they belong, can feel like they thrive. And I think to a certain extent, in some workplaces and some boardrooms, women are still in that underrepresented group. So it hasn't got where it needs to be at in any terms. Some of the things that can be done about it are to measure employee sentiment. And that's not just a once a year thing to do. It's important to maybe do a once a year survey, and it should be anonymous, but there's certainly a reasoning behind actually keeping an open suggestion feedback loop as well, so that at any point, if something happens or someone feels something, that they can feedback on that. I think that it's really important as well that allyship awareness is brought into workplaces. So, it's not just useful if, for instance, one person does some training on it. It needs to be across the board. It needs to be coming from senior management. It needs to be coming from all areas. And it's something that has to be, workplace wide as well. Professional development programs, which can be professional development for something like allyship awareness, or it can be professional development for people who maybe are feeling like they have been not belonging in the workplace, that are feeling a bit of imposter syndrome, that maybe can be helped by doing some development. And also coaching and mentoring. And I think coaching can help people, who are maybe feeling not confident in their careers. But mentoring is so important in the terms of when we're talking about the diversity and inclusion piece and the sense of belonging, because having someone who is a few steps ahead of you in your career that you can look to and that you can see where you can be in a few steps is also very important from the diversity and inclusion standpoint. But also, I think just to have someone say to you, yeah, you remind me of me a few years ago, can be very, it can really make someone feel like they can get there too. So that is really important. And then finally, I just want to end with a little piece of further reading, which I think is very interesting. It's a Harvard Business Review article from earlier this year called End Imposter Syndrome in Your Workplace. And while it does mainly talk about women of color in America, I think it is globally relevant. And if you even take out of color from any sentence that has that and have women, it's probably still quite relevant as well. So I think there's a lot of things that I would question around this that is really interesting topics to debate, to talk about. And I hope that you would bring this away and talk about it. I will be sending these slides around, so you'll be able to click on that link for the further reading if you wish to read it. And think about, where you sit in that, where your workplace sits in that. I do think that it could debate it endlessly. And I think that quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, the former US First Lady, always sticks in my mind. That is, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. So no matter what your workplace is like, I don't think it's entirely a workplace's fault, but it's not entirely people who feel it. It's not their fault either. I think we can all do some work on ourselves. We can all boost our confidence and our self-talk, and hopefully improve our working life through that. But there are definitely some issues in workplaces as well that can be looked at on a more enterprise level. So thank you so much for joining me today. There's all my details if you want to get in touch about anything.